So Nate Silver came out this week with a new prediction on the general election, and it's a little off, if you ask me. So he says that Hillary has a 79% chance of becoming president.
You deal in probabilities, so what are the odds you're putting on the race right now?
So right now we have Hillary's about a 75 or an 80% favorite. We have different versions of the forecast you can look at. So here's how to think about it. We're kind of at halftime of the election right now, and she's taking a 7-point, maybe a 10-point lead into halftime. There's a lot of football left to be played, but she's ahead in almost every poll, every swing state, every national poll.
Now, yesterday I did a segment on this, and I ended up pulling it from YouTube because I misstated something about Nate in the middle of a rant, and it was unfair to him. So I insinuated that he also thought that she would win with 79% of the vote. And of course, that's ridiculous. He doesn't believe that. He says she has a 79% chance of winning, and that's different. That is a significantly less crazy thing to say. Now, that being said, I still disagree with him. So furthermore, I also understand that the average in the polls does not necessarily equal your probability of winning. And I was not clear about that yesterday. So, for example, take Obama in 2012. In one poll, he's up 3 points over Mitt Romney in the weeks leading up to the election. In another poll, he's up 7 points. In another poll, he's up 5 points. And virtually no polls had him down. So as a result of that, Nate Silver quite rightly predicted that Obama had like a 90% chance or thereabouts of winning the general election. And I defended his prediction on that. So I get it. The average that you're up does not necessarily equal your probability of winning the election. So I want to be perfectly clear about that. Now, let me explain to you why, despite all this, I still have Hillary at about 55% chance of winning the election at the moment. Now, that'll change. This will go up and down. But at the moment, I have her as just a slight favorite to win the election, and I do not agree with Nate Silver that it's as high as 79%. I think that's way too high. So, first of all, the polls are all over the place. And as of right now, as Nate recently admitted in a tweet storm about a month or so ago, we're really far out from the election. We're still pretty far out from the election, so to already have it at 79% that Hillary wins, again, I think is too high. And in the past 3 to 4 months, it's not wall-to-wall Hillary winning in the polls. In fact, Trump is up in 5 polls, and it's a statistical tie in 10 more polls. And understand that this isn't just Fox News polls and Rasmussen polls and right-leaning polling organizations. It's also Quinnipiac and ABC News and Washington Post and others. But more than that, he's also competitive, and he's right there in the exact states that he needs to be, the swing states. And Nate, I read Nate's entire piece on his, prediction, his polls plus prediction, and his polls only prediction as to why he has Hillary at about 75 to 80% chance that she'll win. And he even admits in his piece that, well, yeah, but in the swing states, it's actually a more rosy picture for Donald Trump than the overall national poll numbers. Kind of a big factor, if you ask me. Then the third thing is, again, Nate even admits in his piece on this that a possible scenario with Trump, given how his support is spread out across the country, is that he can lose the popular vote and still win the Electoral College. So that's another thing to bear in mind. And then the fourth thing is, honestly, I don't put as much stock in the betting market as Nate does. So that's one of the things that he points to. And don't get me wrong, it's not like it's worth nothing. It's worth something for sure, but I don't weigh it as heavily as he does. And, a good piece of evidence on my side for this is that the betting market, look at it before Brexit, and they were just dead wrong on that. So I wouldn't put too much stock in that. The fifth thing is, dude, Nate has made bold and wrong predictions every step of the way this election. So, for example, he kept saying Trump wouldn't win. And it's not like it was just a one-off thing. It was kind of a theme of his that Trump wouldn't win. So, when people go over the top defending him now, I think do you not see that on some of the biggest questions he was dead wrong? He put him at a 2% chance of winning. And before you say, oh, well, nobody could have seen it, that's not true. When only 3 states voted, I said it would be a minor miracle if he didn't win. So that's not right to say, oh, he's been right all along, when he's wrong, everybody else is wrong. That's not the case. So I predicted it when only 3 states voted, and there were some people who were even earlier than me to it, and they said, before the voting even started, they were like, Trump is the overwhelming favorite. So, and the polls kind of showed that too, by the way. So for him to stick to, at the time, he's not going to win, when the poll showed the opposite, it shows that he's really not necessarily as married to empiricism as he would like you to believe. And on top of that, look at Michigan, man. He had Hillary Clinton at a better than 99% chance of winning Michigan, and he was wrong. So the point here is he's made these really bold, strong predictions before, and he's been wrong. Now, the 6th reason, I'm going to keep going here, there's actually a very clear populist fervor in the country this election cycle, and I don't think he factors that in properly. Now, admittedly, and I understand this, that's super hard to quantify. Like, how do you quantify that? How do you measure that? How do you put numbers to that? That there's this populist fervor in the country. You can't really do it in any way that's, super objective. But it's there, and it's clear that it's there. So I feel like in the absence of a way to quantify that, it's just left off the table in Nate's analysis, and that's one of the reasons why somebody like me has been screaming about how he hasn't done a great job so far. So I would argue that his numbers, while, he says, hey, they're empirical, and this is what I based it on, and you can see how I came to it and whatnot, that's all fine and dandy. But it would be more objective and more empirical if there was some sort of way where we can quantify and calculate just how much this populist fervor is going to affect the outcome on election day. And that's another thing, is the polls that we're looking at, are we talking about polls of, just people in the United States, or are we talking about polls of likely voters? Because then there's a big difference when you look at one versus the other, and there's a million things that go into it, and all the stuff needs to be weighed. So the more information, the better. And when you have no way of sprinkling that into your analysis, I think it's less objective, not more objective. When you have to ignore the populist fervor because, hey, I don't have a way of necessarily factoring that in, like, I get why it's lacking, but then you shouldn't be as bold in your predictions. All right, and the 7th thing here is this. And this is also linked to number 6. This is linked to the populist fervor in the country. How they run their campaigns is everything. And he can't really take that into consideration by design. And if anything, I feel like he falls back on the conventional wisdom too much. The conventional wisdom being, for example, that a Democratic candidate in the general election needs to run to the right to get more moderate, independent voters. Now, he's basing that off of previous elections, and I get the logic behind that, but as I've described to you guys before, I think that's a flawed model because that presupposes that the electorate today is in the same mood it was in the 1990s when Bill Clinton did that, and he won when he ran as a new Democrat, and he triangulated, and he said, he's a neoliberal, and I agree with the Republicans sometime, I agree with the Democrats sometime. At that time, that was the right time in history for a so-called centrist Democrat to come along. So he could look at that and say, well, that's evidence that that's what people want now. But that doesn't take everything into account, like, for example, the neoconservatives and how disastrous they were, like just how much of this populist fervor we have in the country. And it's hard to quantify how much of an effect it'll have when one person runs a really populist campaign and gets people really excited, and the other person is basically the epitome of the establishment, which people know is fucking them over completely right now. So that's another area, and this is why I think he greatly overestimates Hillary's chances, is there's no way to factor this stuff in, and he doesn't factor this stuff in. So Trump, for example, has repeatedly showed he's moving left. He's moved left on foreign policy. He's moved left on economics. He's been left all along on trade deals, on Medicare, on Social Security. His rhetoric, call it what it is just on point for stuff like this. He says, I'm going to make America great again, and I'm going to do that by keeping your jobs here. I'm done with these stupid trade deals. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fight for the American people. Whereas Hillary comes along and it's the same old establishment status quo business as usual bullshit, where she's, mealy-mouthed on it. I don't know, trade's kind of a good thing. We got to be smart about how we do trade, and trade deals aren't necessarily bad, and we shouldn't isolate ourselves from the world. And then also the PC angle of her campaign, how everything is viewed through the spectrum of identity politics. Everything is, I'm the first woman. Isn't that great? Let's break down the barriers. I think that's a paper tiger, man. I think that line of argument is a paper tiger, and it makes many people roll their eyes. And they go, all right, and then what? And then what? You're the first woman, and then what? You'll break down the barriers. What does that mean? So, and when you run a campaign against Donald Trump saying, oh, he uses curse words, as everybody's done to this point, that doesn't work against him. It doesn't work against him. It makes him more popular because we're adults and we don't give a shit about curse words. We care about policy. So you have one person who's moved to the left, one person who's hitting their stride in a populist message, and the other person who's just business as usual and a standard politician, and obviously the mood in the country does not fall in line with that. Now, still, don't get me wrong, even with all this stuff, I do think that Hillary Clinton is a favorite, and I think that based on the numbers and based on the polls. I just think that he overestimates her chances, and I think this is as silly. 79% this far out, based on everything we have, all the information we have. I do think that's as silly as a better than 99% chance in Michigan, and I do think that's as silly as saying that Trump has no chance. So, yeah, I think he's shown he can make bad predictions. Of course, I can make bad predictions too, obviously. But that's a really bold prediction, and I think it's based on limited information, and he needs to factor in more things. So 79% is way too high. And by the way, I wouldn't do a segment against him if, for example, he said, I think she has a 60% chance of winning. I wouldn't be doing this segment. Now, I would still disagree with him because, again, I have heard a slight favorite. I have heard about a 55% chance. But if he said 60% chance, okay, that's still a reasonable thing to say. Like, that's not a crazy thing to say. I wouldn't be doing this segment if he said that. If he said 65%, I wouldn't be doing this segment because that's still a reasonable thing to say. Based on the evidence, that's within the realm of reason to say, oh, yeah, that's possible. Dude, even if he went as far as 70%, I probably wouldn't be doing this segment. But when he says 79% chance that she wins, I don't agree with that. And I think he's missing a lot of factors, and I don't think these predictions are nearly as good as his predictions in 2008 when he was spot on, in 2012 when he was spot on, and he even admitted in this election cycle. I've kind of been off. Yes, I've been off. Now, he still has a very high getting it right percentage. So do I. So do a lot of people because some of them are just no-brainers. But on very important ones, like whether or not Trump would get the nomination and Michigan, he was dead wrong. So, I don't know, a little more humility would be nice. Ticking down that number a tad would be nice. And not doing it based on less information, doing it based on more information. The more you factor in, and again, I know it's hard to factor these things in and quantify it, but the more you factor in, I think the more you realize that number ain't 79%, it's significantly lower than that.